Yesterday, we talked about the importance of a elite quarterback for Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns, but perhaps just as important as an elite quarterback is being able to lock down your own state. And lo and behold, if we look at the state of Texas and the landscape of recruiting as it pertains to the class of 2022, Old St. Nick is back in the state of Texas, and we have got to talk about Alabama's pursuit amongst the top players in the state. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from y'all. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you believe that Nick Saban and company raid the state of Texas again, just like they did last year? And if you agree with that, let me know what you're thinking. Let me know who you think that Nick Saban and company get. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification because I do constant college football content and you don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoy that content, be sure to like, comment down below. Those interactions are huge for content creators such as myself. But with all that being said and out the way, I want to talk about the state of Texas because not only is that where I'm from, the state of Texas is immensely talented this year. It's always talented, but this year in particular is absolutely ridiculous. And not only are the Texas Longhorns trying to lock down their state, you have Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide trying to establish a factory in the state of Texas that allows them to just sit here and camp out and be able to poach the best talent from the state. And when you look at the recruiting landscape in the class of 2022, you can see Alabama is very present in the state of Texas. Whether we're talking about Denver Harris, Devin Campbell, Banks, the high-graded tackle, Harold Perkins, Nick Saban and company have their hands all over the state of Texas. And it doesn't just stick to the recruits that they're going after. Look at the hires Nick Saban and company have made. If we're talking about a defensive analyst hire in Mark Orfeh from Houston, Texas. Oh, and by the way, a graduate and alum of North Shore High School. So Alabama goes out and hires a defensive analyst that is an alum of the same high school five-star cornerback Denver Harris currently attends. They go out and get Drew Svoboda, who went out and coached Klein Collins way back in the day in Houston, Texas. Very highly regarded in South Texas. And then for the cornerback position coach, they went out and got Jay Valai, a coach that had just spent time in the state of Texas. So Nick Saban and them are very adamant about being able to stay and get the players they want out of the state of Texas. But let's talk about some names, because today I want to talk about names such as Amari Abor, Jamarian Miller, Denver Harris, Terrence Brooks, Bryce Anderson, Evan Stewart, and Devin Campbell, because these are all guys that the Alabama Crimson Tide are after, and some of them I'm very confident the Crimson Tide are in a phenomenal place. Others we've talked about here on this channel, and I think that the Tide are now looking at elsewhere or perhaps not in as good of a position as they once were. So we're going to start with Amari Abor, and this is someone who the Tide are going to be after any opportunity they get. This kid is incredibly talented, and he's been flying up the board. Not too long ago, I made a video talking about him and booking it, saying this kid will be a five-star. Book it. Make no mistake about it. And less than a week later, he was a five-star. He is incredibly talented. He's a name we have to watch. And the Alabama Crimson Tide have a bit of an in with Abor because Kendrick Blackshire was his former teammate. Not only that, but Jay Valai is regarded as a phenomenal recruiter in the North Texas area. He has got a lot of ties to the North Texas area where Amari Abor finds himself, and that right there could pay massive dividends for the Crimson Tide. Abor is not down to any particular universities. He's released his top 10. Those are going to be trimmed here soon. We don't know when, but the process and the recruitment process for Abor is still wide open. The Tide look to continue battling. Jamarian Miller is a kid who we just heard this weekend looks to be trending for the Alabama Crimson Tide. This was a kid who the Texas Longhorns really wanted to be able to keep in state, and they are absolutely going to keep trying until ink hits paper. But as it stands right now, the Crimson Tide are looking like they're in a really good position to be able to sign a second running back into this class, adding on to Emmanuel Henderson, the number one running back in the class of 2022, five-star, currently a part of the 22 class for the Crimson Tide. Being able to get Jamarian Miller would be big. The Alabama Crimson Tide running back room right now is incredibly loaded, but given the way Alabama likes to run their offense, and I get it, it's not the old days where they just gave it to the running back 1,000 times, and that was all they did. The quarterback was just there as a placeholder. The running back is still very, very key to how Alabama likes to spring the passing game. And Najee Harris can be the perfect perfect case study of this. The way he's able to be utilized, the things he's able to do. The Crimson Tide are looking for a versatile back, and if they can't have it in one guy, they would like to have a committee of guys that offer a variable of different skill sets. That's why I'm always big on the Crimson Tide being able to nab multiple running backs if need be. But the running back position is going to be one that continues to be loaded because, like I said, Emmanuel Henderson, 5-star in this class. But if we look to the next class, in the class of 2023, the number one running back in that class, Richard Young, has called Alabama a dream school and a dream offer. So the running back position continues to be stacked. Now to talk about some defensive backs from the state of Texas, and Terrence Brooks, Denver Harris, and Bryce Anderson. And I'm going to get it out the way first. The one that I would say is the least likely to the Crimson Tide at this point is Bryce Anderson. Bryce Anderson is set to commit July 4th. He will be taking visits this summer, and the Crimson Tide have done a really, really good job in making up ground in the recruiting battle for Bryce Anderson. This looked to be a lock to the Texas Longhorns after he decommitted from LSU, but the Tide have really made their case and have actually gotten it to where they are going to be receiving a visit, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I think this is a kid that ends up staying in Texas. I think the Longhorns end up getting a extremely talented safety in Bryce Anderson because this would be a home run to get for Steve Sarkisian and company. However, on the flip side, the Crimson Tide are pushing incredibly hard for Denver Harris and Terrence Brooks. So much so, in fact, that Nick Saban is pretty much well taken over the process for one Denver Harris. We know that this is a very, very important person to Nick Saban. Nick Saban has poured over Denver Harris in the past. When talking about him, he hasn't hid his just awe for this kid's ability. Nick Saban really wants this kid a part of the 22 class. Jay Valai, Nick Saban, they're all going to be in constant communication with Denver Harris, and that's going to be a very hard battle. It looks to be between Texas, A&M, LSU, and Alabama, but based on what I'm hearing, Alabama's in a really good position. This is still a long ways to go. It's too early to say where he will go, but I can say that I think Alabama has really put themselves in a strong position, and it's only going to continue getting stronger with Nick Saban becoming more and more involved, and especially now that he's going to be able to get into campus in an official capacity. That's going to be big for the Tide. Terrence Brooks is in a similar boat as Denver Harris. I think the Crimson Tide are in a really, really good spot for Terrence Brooks, a guy they've singled out for quite some time out the state of Texas. Remember, like I said, the Tide are going to be looking to stay in the state of Texas and keep a stranglehold on there. The more players they can get out the state of Texas, the less talent everybody else has to contend with, and they are really, really going hard after the defensive back position. Remember the other day we talked about 5-star Damani Jackson. The USC commit has now announced that he will be visiting Tuscaloosa this summer. So the Crimson Tide could end up in a situation where this class alone, they get a 5-star in Denver Harris and a 5-star in Damani Jackson. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it could. The last two guys we're going to talk about. Devin Campbell, the offensive lineman. This is someone who the Crimson Tide were really, really lucky to be included in his top 8. They weren't in his top 16. They made up a lot of good ground with Doug Marrone. Doug Marrone has been impressing some recruits, and I think recruits are actually taking to him better than some of us thought, but at the end of the day, I still think that this is a kid who ends up at the Texas Longhorns. I think the Crimson Tide are in a good position for some other offensive linemen and will look to continue recruiting Devin Campbell because he is incredibly talented, but I think this kid goes to Texas, and that leaves us with the last kid I want to talk about in Evan Stewart. Now, if you're not new to this channel, if you've been viewing for a while, if you're a Texas or Alabama fan, and you've seen any of my videos on Evan Stewart, you know I've thought he was a 5-star since back in December, well before he was rated as a 5-star. I actually said I thought he was a top 5 receiver all day, every day, and lo and behold, now that's what he's ranked. This kid right here has got burners. He is incredibly fast. He's got a good size, and he's got a lot of room to add in good weight at the next level. He can continue working on his route running ability, but all the intangibles are there. Evan Stewart is a kid who was committed to Texas, decommitted, and is now back on the market, but Alabama is going to be working very hard to try and get him and continue the lineage of 5-star receivers coming to the capstone and leaving as first-round draft picks because it has become a trend under Sir Nick Saban. So the Alabama Crimson Tide are scouting Texas as hard as ever. And even though Steve Sarkisian Sarkisian and company have a phenomenal staff down in Austin that looks to be able to try and relight the fire within the halls of the Big 12 to get Texas back where it should be. Make no mistake about it, Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide are staked out in the state of Texas, and they have their eyes on a lot of recruits, and they are getting into phenomenal position going into the summer for a lot of highly regarded prospects. That's it. I want to hear from y'all. Hop down to the comments. Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you believe that the Crimson Tide will raid the state of Texas again this year? Who do you believe that they will be getting out the state? And that's it. See ya.